All right. Welcome to the Point of View podcast. We got a pretty special visitor, special guest today. I'm super excited because I just believe as a result of this opportunity to sit with this man, we're all going to be blessed. We're all going to be enlightened. We're all going to be empowered. Our perspectives are going to be, all the more empowered. And so, without further ado, Gordon Chavez, man, how's it going?
Good. Thank you. I appreciate it.
No doubt, man. Thanks for coming through. Before I dive in, man, just if you don't mind, kind of just give us a little bit about who you are, what you got going on these days. And I think that'll kind of like slide us into our dialogue about what's going on in the world of our immediate community today.
Yeah. No, so like you said, Gordon Chavez, I grew up here in Oceanside. My wife and I are now raising our boys in Oceanside. I have 4 boys. One of them's grown and has moved out, and he's living up in LA now and doing his thing. But just trying to focus on, I guess, making my life like a more holistic, a whole life where, my professional work, my faith-based work, my family, and then my community work are all in sync, and that's what I'm trying to do, I see huge value in what you do, and that's why, I'm always willing to help out and participate and see what I can do to help.
Yeah.
I work with lived experiences. Professionally, I have my own business where I teach people how money works. Financial literacy is like stuck in a specific demographic within our society, and we need to open it up and make it available for everybody.
Yeah.
Faith-based, my faith is all about unity. Everybody, and that unity is part of everything that I do. And so it just translates across the board, and so that's what I'm trying to focus on. Just trying to be very, I guess, intentional in everything that I do day to day.
So unity being a core value of yours. What ultimately? Because if you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
45.
45. So I'm 41. So we're pretty much, I believe, in the same. You know how generations are in Oceanside. Like it's. I think if you're, within a 5-year situation, like we probably didn't see each other in the same, like passing at that time, of our teens or in our early 20s or mid 20s. But what was something that you've seen, I would say, because when you say you grew up in here in Oceanside, like, is that like a born and raised situation, or like did you come here at a certain time and just grew all the way up until now at 45, or?
No, good question. So no, I wasn't born in Oceanside. When I was born, my parents lived in Encinitas, and I was born at Scripps in La Jolla.
Oh, wow.
And, excuse me, and we lived there probably for a couple years. Then we moved to New York. My mom's originally from New York and like Ohio, Cleveland area.
Yeah. And
we lived there for a little bit, and then we came back, and that's when we came back and lived in Oceanside. That was 1980. And so from 1980 on, I pretty much grew up in Oceanside, but when I was actually 15, at that point my parents were divorced, and my brother and I were getting into a lot of trouble. We were living in the valley at that time.
Okay.
And so the whole situation just wasn't a good situation, back to, the finances. We struggled financially, right? And so my mom decided we're going to go back to her hometown where she grew up. And so we moved to New York again. I lived there for about a year when I was 15, 16. And then I came back to Cali to live with my dad. And at that point, it was in Orange County. And then from Orange County back to Oceanside. And then in Oceanside, again, I got into a little more trouble. Nothing serious. But basically, basically my dad took me to live with my uncle. I wasn't going to stay with my dad anymore because of what was happening. Yeah. And that was in Vista. And so I went to live in Vista for a little bit. And so it's just kind of back and forth between like Oceanside and Vista from then on. So, but all in all, most of my time, most of my adult life, and most of my childhood was in Oceanside.
So you were born in 80. You were, or not born in 80, but you landed in Oceanside in 80. Yeah. That was like a year before I was born. So for me, it makes it even more exciting chopping it up with you because, like, not only have you spent most of your life in Oceanside, but you spent a lot of time in an area where I grew up, and I grew up in the Valley. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, it kind of like helps me to segue into that question. Again, like what ultimately in your childhood or like transitioning into your teens that you can think back on and into your young adult life has a lot to do with your core value of like just unification and unity.
I think number one, my faith. And so I'm Baha'i. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Baha'i faith.
I haven't.
But the core value of the Baha'i faith is unity. And even though we had our struggles growing up, you know, my mom that constant was always there. The faith was always there, whether I participated in it or not, right? There were times where I would just not even, like, I didn't want to have anything to do with it for a while, and then back and forth. But it was always that constant, and the core beliefs of my faith and then my own personal core beliefs were always in line. And so that, and I think also, you know, my mom was always very much all about like social justice, unity, as I said, racial unity. You know, she was somewhat of a hippie, in her time and everything, and so that just that mindset of you know, like humanity is one, was always a big part of my life. It doesn't matter what your skin tone is, doesn't matter what your gender is, none of that stuff matters. You know, that's human stuff of this world, but we were created by an entity from another world, and that stuff doesn't matter there. I believe, you know, that's at least what I believe. And so if I stick to that, I think that will always keep me going in the right direction, you know, and will lead to me associating with the people that I want to associate. There's like this law of attraction that the things that I do will put me in proximity to certain people, and I'll click with certain people, and some people I won't, or whatever. And it's all good. None of it's bad. It's just the direction that I move my life in will bring me into the presence of certain, you know, energies, you know, so.
It's so like growing up in Oceanside for me, thinking back now, it's like, because it seems like that's something that I'm very like fixed on now, is like wanting to be unified. Like a lot of individuals, like unified with people that I once would just say, so to, like, for instance, like being a gang member and growing up in Oceanside, all of the years that I gangbanged, there were individuals that now that I look at it, I didn't look at it then as I was socially conditioning myself to not be in a position to be unified or to be in community with like certain races. Mm-hmm. But for whatever reason, at some point in Oceanside, like that, well, in the Valley, that's ultimately what happened, you know, with me. I grew up, I had a Samoan best friend, Yurima Fanagua. I had a Hispanic best friend, Miguel. I had an Asian best friend, like I had a white best friend. But at some point, it just seemed like what was already taking place, that I had no way to see it. Mm-hmm. I was where I was in my growth development and in my understanding of just how life was working. It really wasn't a conversation in my home. My uncle and my mom, they had a variety of friends of different ethnic backgrounds. Mm-hmm. But somehow I look up at 30 years old, when I actually decided to stop gangbanging, and I find myself in this place of trying to fight for something that innately was in me, which is to be in community with everybody. Yeah. And it was hard. I was in prison at the time. It was hard, but I started looking back like, man, like when did I become, because I started learning a little bit about social conditioning, and it was more like the term and the definition, it kind of comes more along the lines of like being socially conditioned by the government, or being socially conditioned by the school system, or being socially conditioned by, but what took place with me happened within a gang and happened within an environment within my community. And so now that I'm at the age of 41. It's crazy, but it's still a struggle. It seems like the more I find myself rooted on this side of life, where I want unity with the majority of individuals that I once didn't have unity with, I'm meeting obstacles. You know what I'm saying? That say this isn't like. This just isn't the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be like it's always been. And we can actually still have, the greatest Oceanside ever, or the greatest San Diego ever, or the greatest California ever in this state of being. And, it just doesn't seem like that's an objective truth. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's very subjective. Like, what is your perspective concerning just what you've seen in like aiming and rallying for unity, the social conditioning of just our city, just like of Oceanside, and not to put particular races on blast or but just in the sense of even like what might seem to be an obstacle as a result of what's happened over the years.
Well, I think for me personally, I come from multicultural ethnicity, I guess you can call it. I'm half Mexican, half white. And so the Mexican side of my family was big. Like my dad, all my uncles, aunts, everything. And generationally spread out too. Like I had uncles that were only maybe 5 years older than me or whatever. On the white side, my mom was an only child. So I didn't have any aunts and uncles, cousins. The white side of my family wasn't, plus they were all on the East Coast.
Gotcha.
And so I grew up in a Hispanic household. I learned to speak Spanish better than English I had to take ESL when I was in kindergarten at Pacifica Elementary.
Oh, wow. You went to Pacifica too?
Yeah. Pacifica Elementary. And so I had to learn English in school as like a kindergartner or preschool, whatever it might have been that I did when I was there. But my own experience was like this inner battle of identities. For the white side of the world, I didn't think like them, I didn't talk like them, I didn't sound like them, I didn't act like them. And for the Mexican side of the world, I didn't look like them, and I actually looked like the oppressor. I looked like there's almost like in my experience, there's almost this idea of looking up to the white man from the Mexican side of the world. Yeah. It's almost like not so much a fear or hate or any of that. It's more of I want to be like them, And so I was always like, my aunts and my uncles would always look at me and basically kind of just act like I wasn't Mexican enough, and on the white side I wasn't white enough. And so I always had this inner struggle where I didn't really know, but deep down inside I knew that it didn't really matter, right? And so I had to get to a point where I was confident.
I'm sorry, man.
Go ahead.
Because what we're on, it's like even on the inside of you have to like, even you're fighting just for unity within your own ethnic makeup.
Yeah.
That's deep, man.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, it's all good. Like I said, something inside of me was always like that unity idea that it doesn't matter what, right? That stuff doesn't matter. But at the same time, on the outside, when you're a kid, it's a struggle, because, first of all, kids are just brutal, right? They're brutally honest, but then at the end, they're also, it's rough being a kid, no matter what generation you're in. And so when you're a kid, and when I was a kid going to like Pacifica and Lincoln, and even I went to El Camino for a year, it's like, it was kind of, everything was like, all the ethnicities were separated. Like at school, you'd have the white kids over there, and then you'd have the Mexicans or the essays or whatever you want to call them over there. You had black kids over there. You had Samoan. We had, Samoan and Oceanside. Other communities probably can't say that as much, right? And then you had everybody else. But at the same time, if I walking into this, depending on who my friends were, the Mexican kids weren't accepting me, and the white kids weren't accepting me. So the places where I thought that I should fit in, based on what the world was telling me,
there you go.
they weren't accepting me. They're like, no, you know what? This is not where you're supposed to be, you know? And so luckily for me, the Samoan kids accepted me. Samoan kids didn't care. Right. And so I kind of grew up with Samoan kids. And at the same time, I'm like, why can't we just all get along? Because like I still had friends that were essays. I had from Mesa, and then my uncle used to bang Center Street, and so there was that background. And then, you know, I had friends that were black. I had friends that I knew before they started banging DVC and all of that, because you know we're in elementary school,
right?
And so I watched them, that transition from just a average kid trying to find his way to like all blue and
all bad.
Yeah. Well, you know.
Well, I'm not. You know what I'm saying. Like ultimately, I'm speaking from like my personal. I'm that kid.
Mm-hmm.
I was eating at tables with Samoans in their house or in their garage. I was eating at Hispanic kids' houses, and there was a point where I did not. It was all good.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying. But
it was so diverse. It was then. In the early '80s, mid '80s, even to like '90. There was a lot more diversity in Oceanside, at least than from what I remember. Maybe even through the '90s to some extent.
Right, and not to say, I mean, I know that wasn't everybody's experience. There were some black kids, you know, that just their families were so big, and they had so many cousins that's all they ever really hung out with.
Yeah,
it wasn't the case for me.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? All my cousins were play cousins. Me and my sister were pretty much, we grew up right in the middle of the valley, you know, on the left side though. So it was like right down the street from Pacifica. You know, Pacifica, I mean, Del Rio 2 and Reynolds like all had a handful of everybody, but one school or the other had more. Like Libby had more Hispanics at one point. Pacifica had more blacks at one point. Del Rio had more Samoans at one point. At some point though, as soon as I stepped into Lincoln, the divisions were just very, like from Pacifica to Lincoln was like, it was just different. And then stepping in El Camino, it was just like, it was a mature sense of, you know, division. And like the diversity was there, but this is where like for me, like even more like the social conditioning, I had pulled up that definition and it says, it's the sociological process of training individuals in a society to respond in a manner generally approved by the society. You know what I'm saying? And I didn't know. No one in my family even knows how to say, hey, be careful that you're not, you know what I'm saying, like conform to the society out there, you know what I'm saying, of like this or that. It's just that, you know, my mom, she dibbled and dabbled in drugs. My uncle dibbled and dabbled in drugs. Like, it was just what it was for them, and they were too distracted to even know what they were being socially conditioned in. But that's how I was introduced to a lot of Samoans and Samoan families. That's how I was introduced to a lot of, you know, Hispanic families. It was through my mother and my uncle.
Looking outwardly.
They had they grew up in that generation. You know what I'm saying? Like 70s, transitioning into the 80s. Yeah. And they had already, my grandfather worked at that liquor store that's now Big Liquor. You know what I'm saying? But I look back now when I realized like what actually like anchored us in like the divisions. And then it really occurred to me, because now I'm a part of the problem. You know what I'm saying? That's keeping the divisions, and I'm actually like perpetuating it. This is my like mature self speaking now, but then I couldn't, you know, before I transitioned into a life of like being like on the other side of like gangbanging and wanting to push that line. Now I can see that I was like, I don't know how I transitioned into that, but I know I can recollect every step of the way once I was there on like how I would not be in unity with individuals. You know what I'm saying? Like, and so like I like kind of like stepping into that. Have you ever heard of like trauma bonds?
A little bit.
What is your experience of either hearing or like just coming into contact with a dialogue of like trauma bonds?
So prior to working with lived experiences, I didn't necessarily, I mean, I knew the word trauma, right? It's just a word, right? I think probably the only association that I had to that, or that I could connect to that, was just, you hear a lot of talk about PTSD in the military, right? But trauma, everybody experiences some kind of trauma, right? You don't have to go to a war to experience trauma, at least, not in the traditional sense. And so, as far as trauma bonds, I can't necessarily define it for you. I'm kind of ignorant as to that connection, but I would assume that it has to do with the attachments that we have that are a result of the traumatic experiences that we've had, maybe. But as far as a real definition, I wouldn't be able to.
And that's, I mean, it's pretty much just that, you know what I'm saying? Like, and that's, I was talking with, so there's a friend of mine. We used to be from the same gang. We still battle daily. We have dialogues daily. We make it a point to reach out to each other daily, because we're on a side of it that not a lot of our counterparts are. Wannabe just don't know how to identify life outside of what they're bonded to, And so as we dialogue, he's like, now he works with youth, and he works with youth in a way similar to the way we do, but he's like a serial group home starter now. So he's been in the group home industry for 20 years. He stepped in when he was like 18, trying to stay out of trouble, started working for a group home, started getting revelation. Like, a lot of the kids are starting to link to him and grab onto him. And like, it hasn't pulled him all the way out, but he's kind of in a place now that kind of gives him perspective. And then 20 years later now, he's in a position of like, it's his expertise. He's found his niche. And so, he studies as he brings staff into these facilities that he launches. A lot of the curriculum is like ACE-based, ACEs-based, like adverse childhood experiences, or like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And he said that they have to, like, it's mandatory that they have to like go through certain trainings because of the kind of kids that they deal with. Like, they get kids from like Polinsky, they get kids from like, that are just like will be considered the worst of the worst, or have just like been through the worst, you know what I'm saying? Like, and they're in a place to where they're so traumatized that they've either bonded to the experiences or the symptoms like that come as a result of the trauma, or they're bonded to the experiences of people that they have relationships with as a result of the trauma that they've experienced. And so we were dialoguing, and he was like, he was chopping it up with one of the kids, and he realized as he was dialoguing with him and the kids and the counselor and the psych that this kid's trauma bonds were deep. And as he was sharing that, I had never heard the two words linked together. I've heard obviously of the word trauma, like you mentioned, and then the word, like, we all have bonds with someone or even something. But so I was like, man, is that actually like a word or a term? And he explained it like exactly how you just expressed. Things that we actually bond ourselves to either cope with trauma, or people that we bond ourselves to that we've experienced traumas with together. And so obviously within this particular city, and within any city where there's gangbanging, or where there's drug abuse, or where there's relationships within families where trauma is imminent and unavoidable and inevitable, trauma bonds are everywhere. And that's ultimately what I'm starting to see seems to be one of the dividing factors and one of the biggest obstacles between like us and unity here in the city. You know what I'm saying? Like, these social things that we've just like, we can't let go of, or it's hard for us to let go of, or we want to, but there's just not the forum, or like I believe there's beginning to be, as we dialogued about before. But there's like obstacles, man, that are keeping us bonded to a lot of trauma. You know what I'm saying? Like murders, and just like violent situations that have happened over the course of the years since, like, as far as your memory can take you back up until now. What are some of the things that you've seen actually like that kind of helped, like, to dissipate some of the trauma, some of the efforts by certain organizations, you know, grandfather organizations out here. And when I say grandfather, I don't really mean age. I'm just saying, like, since I was a youngster, you know what I'm saying? Like, there are certain individuals, there are certain programs that have been here, you know, that have helped. And for some reason, it seems like whether it was, I don't want to say it was an agenda by, like, I don't want to say it was it's an agenda. It just happens, right? In certain cities, like, certain money's allocated to certain things, certain money stopped to fund certain things, but it just seems like where cup stacking was helping at some point, or where, you know, the Boys and Girls Club was just a different entity at one time, to where a lot of us can just run to, and we were able to bond in ways without the dividing factors, you know.
Yeah.
You know, what are some of the things that you've seen throughout your time here, like, instituted, kind of like uprooted, and then, like, now, like other things are being instituted that need to be focused on and need to be kind of, like, gotten behind and given momentum to help, like, uproot some of these social situations and, like, aid these trauma bonds and, like, unravel and unknot these trauma bonds.
Yeah. So, as you were talking, you know, there's a few things that I feel like in my life were kind of there for me, right? When I needed that something, when I needed maybe to feel accepted or feel like I belonged to something. Whereas, you know, inside I was kind of just, you know, when I was little, my life was what it was. I would say that I maybe, just because I was little, I wasn't taking maybe a proactive approach in my life. So I didn't care whether I looked white or was I Mexican, did I speak Spanish, that stuff didn't matter to me. But at some point, right, we started to realize that, oh, the world is kind of messed up and divided and all of this stuff. And then I got to figure out where I fit in. One of the things that I was thinking about is hip hop, you know, because when I was really little, I used to break dance. And then as I got a little older, one of my uncles taught me how to draw, like, Old English letters. And so I started getting into drawing, and then I started doing graffiti. So hip hop was always that thing that didn't care that I was white, didn't care that I acted Mexican, if, you know, based on what some people would say, and that stuff didn't matter, you know. Another thing, as I said earlier, was my faith. But that wasn't so much that the faith was sometimes more active in my life and less active in my life. My faith was constant. It was my participation that fluctuated. My participation, where I was very much interested in being a part of it, and sometimes I wasn't. And that was my own battle. That was my own thing. That it wasn't that my faith was changing or anything like that. It was me. And then, you know, like, my family situation, you know, like, for example, I went to 4 different high schools. Every year in high school, I was in a different school.
Every year? So freshman, sophomore, junior, senior.
Yeah. Freshman was at El Camino. My sophomore year was in New York. My junior year was in Orange County. And then I graduated at Vista when I lived at my uncle's house. And so that in itself, that whole because high school is big to a young person, right? It's like, it's where you really start to develop these bonds and these roots and your identity, and so having to switch high schools and having, you know, I was going to say uprooted, but never really even being able to place roots, you know, put your roots down. That was a challenge. And I think it kind of forced me, although it was hard, it forced me to develop a certain level of comfort with myself, right? Because, I mean, if you don't have consistent friends that you can just, you know, call at any time and say, look, you know what, let's go hang out, let's do this, let's whatever, because you need that bond, you need that you need to just be in their presence or whatever to feel good about yourself. When you don't necessarily have that, you have to feel good some way, somehow, right? And so I think I got to a point where I was like, I'm just going to be me. And not that it was easy, but I said, I have to be me, and I have to be comfortable with who that is, right? Otherwise, it's going to be a lonely world.
What was the hardest part about that for you? Just being you?
I think the hardest part was I was always socially awkward. I was more of an introvert. And so I wasn't the type of person that was I wasn't going to the school dances. I didn't even want to go. I wasn't going out to parties. I would go to a party here and there, but I never really enjoyed it. So I never really did that. I was I get anxious in large crowds. I'm better at it now, right?
Yeah.
But in those times, I was very socially awkward. And so the hard part, where if you're not able to develop those friendships, those bonds with those key people in your life, you're always in a new crowd. You're always in a new situation. So that comfort, you never reach that comfort level. You can't just say, I'm going to go hang out with my friends. Because who are they, right? It's next year they're going to be somebody different. And so even though it was very difficult, I feel like it forced me to be stronger. If I wasn't at least just comfortable with who I was, it was because I didn't have a group to hang out with.
Yeah.
So
what was the easier part about that for you?
The easiest part
of just being you,
I think maybe the easiest part might have been the exposure to different groups of people. So when I was growing up in the Valley and I went to El Camino, most of my friends were Samoans. And then I moved to New York, and this is upstate New York, near Buffalo. And most of my friends were black. And then Orange County, it was more diverse, I guess, but there were Persian friends and Asian friends and white friends, and so I saw that. So I saw different worlds, and then I came back to Oceanside, and it was back to Oceanside, and I went to Vista High School, but that same North County world, I guess you could say, and it just gave me more. A broader experience of different types of groups, different cultures, understanding different people. And now, I mean, I'm 45 years old, right? Now I can easily tell you, you know what? I got friends in New York that I consider family. I got friends now. Some of them moved to Atlanta. I got friends in Atlanta that I consider family. I got friends out here. I got friends Orange County. And so that exposure, I guess, instead of just being limited to kind of like what you were saying regarding, social conditioning, if your world is, say, for example, just the Valley, then you figure out kind of naturally and organically how to fit into the Valley identity.
Yeah.
Right. And it's based on skin tone and ethnicity and all of that stuff, who your friends are and all of that. But then you get pushed out, and then upstate New York's nothing like the Valley, right?
Right.
Orange County is nothing like that either.
Right.
And, even Vista is a little different from the Valley.
Of course, yeah.
And so when you get this exposure, it's not that it was easy in the moment, but it kind of gave me a different perspective in the long run. In my early 20s and even in my late teens, I was kind of things that I feel like I was more open-minded maybe, because it was I experienced all this other stuff that nothing was... I guess I was able to be more inclusive. Mm-hmm. If I met somebody that was a little different, it didn't catch me off guard. I was like, cool, come and hang out or whatever. Let's do something. Let's hang out. Whereas I feel like I had friends and family that only had the experience of whatever their world was. And because of that, they felt like they only had to hang out with those types of people and only do those types of things. Otherwise, it felt weird to them.
Yeah.
Whereas I think I felt more comfortable in, more diverse situations, I guess.
Tell us a little bit more about lived experiences and how your involvement and just your, collaborating your lived experience with the lived experiences experience, how this reality is very beneficial for the immediate community, and like how you've seen perspectives change. You know what I'm saying? How you've seen lives just light up. You know what I'm saying? How you've probably even, I can only imagine, you've shared with me, about the mobile laundromat. I don't want to speak on it. You go ahead and just share.
Yeah, so lived experiences, basically you can say Oscarino Ortega, because although there is an organization, they're board members and all of that, he's really that guy.
Right.
He's the one in the community. And there's volunteers. I'm not discounting anybody, but from the beginning, he was that guy. And so I actually met him kind of by accident. I was actually working. I was in the middle of a presentation on financial literacy. I was doing it in Spanish, which my Spanish is not as good as it used to be. And I'm getting better, and everything is getting better, right? But I'm doing this Spanish presentation, and he walks in to see the presentation as well, because we had mutual friends at that time. And so after the presentation, we met, we talked. He said, I do youth mentorship and things like that. And I'm all that. To me, the youth is where we need to invest our time. To me, that's just me. And so when somebody says I work with the youth, that catches my attention, right? And so I was like, okay, well, I'd like to learn more about what you're doing. And so, and he as well wanted to learn more about what I was doing in my business. And so he actually invited me to talk about entrepreneurship to his youth at that time. And this was pre-COVID. And so, and it was actually Chris Parks and I went to talk, because I introduced him to Chris, and, we started talking. And so he invited both Chris and I to go talk about entrepreneurship to his youth. And we did that. And I really liked the bond that he had with the youth. I really like how...
Because it is unique. I haven't... The thing about Oscar, too, sorry to cut you off.
No, you're good.
I haven't been around him in the midst of his passion with the youth and his roots with the youth. But it's like, it's real when you talk to people and you can feel the essence of it through the person. Or my wife the other day was like, did you know about this mobile laundromat? But because that type of stuff, it makes her, she's a teacher. She's a special needs teacher. You know what I'm saying? So when individuals, the essence of what he has actually established, it reverberates, or it sends those ripples. You know what I'm saying? Like, even as you're sharing right now, like I can feel the essence of what you're saying about what it is, like him being lived experience has become what it's become, but the heartbeat is Oscar.
It's him.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But go ahead.
No, it's all good. You're absolutely right. As you were speaking, I was trying to think like how to describe it, and it's almost like he's like a chameleon. Like, he just goes and he fits right in, right? Everybody feels comfortable, right? He goes and we do food distribution, and you go to a food distribution, and it's not your typical scene that you see like on commercials where Feeding San Diego shows up with the Feeding San Diego shirts, and it's I hate to say it, right, but it's white people serving the community of color, right? Diverse, beautiful color, and exactly who's serving who. You go to a lived experiences food distribution,
you don't even know
who's who. It's just there's food and everybody's eating and everybody's happy, and this energy just as you said, vibrates through the group, through the community, and it's I think it's because he's really serving what his needs were as a kid. I think that's really because he's from that
deep,
hood,
man. Yeah,
he's just this is what I
serving his needs of what his needs were when he was coming up in that community.
Exactly.
Because that's one of the more Crown Heights. That is one of the more it is just very. It's just a very it is diverse I'm saying in the sense of of the struggles. There's levels You know what I'm saying? Of struggles within Crown Heights. There's levels of struggles within Posole. There's levels of struggles in Mesa. There's levels of struggles in the Valley. But it's just different.
Yeah.
You know, like, not to discount any of us all from the city, but it's like when you go to an event like that, I can imagine in Crown Heights, it's just different.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, it is different. And I can imagine you wouldn't be able to, if you were coming looking for Oscar at an event you heard was in Crown Heights, you wouldn't be able to, if you didn't see a picture, you wouldn't be able to just spot him out.
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not like, unless you are like in tune spiritually, it probably would be extremely hard for you to be like, that's probably him.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. He's not your typical CEO. You know, he's like, as we said, that's his community. He grew up there. And so he knows the needs. And what does he do? Well, he started with youth mentorship, right? And then COVID hit. And so he quickly switched to food distribution. And that to me was another impressive thing. How quickly he said, I got to keep my youth safe. I'm going to give them food. He started doing food distribution like that. And that's a beautiful gathering, I guess. I don't know how else to describe it, of the community serving itself. He does, as you said, mobile laundry. You know, you go, you show up with your clothes, and you get to wash your clothes for free. You know, and he takes it to different areas of Oceanside, one of them being Crown Heights, Center Street.
Unpack that real quick, because that's like, I can imagine people are trying to like figure out like what we're talking about when we say mobile laundry. But we're talking about a vehicle that has been configured to have laundry machines or washer and dryers on them.
Exactly. It's like your laundry room at home. It's like the laundromat on the corner. You go, there's washers, there's dryers, there's soap, there's everything you need to just show up, do your laundry, and walk away with clean clothes.
Never heard of that before.
Exactly.
Never ever.
Exactly. And so that's a beautiful, and I think, like I said before, he's serving the community based on what his needs were coming up through that community, and it's like he just knows, right? And now we have the mobile media center, which is kind of like what you have here. I mean, maybe not as nice. What you have here in a mobile trailer. You pull around with the truck and you can show up anywhere and do a podcast, do a video thing, do whatever you got to do.
Or just to learn, right? Like an environment for kids to come in and learn how to podcast, film, do audio.
Exactly. And that's the idea. That was the original idea. The original idea is to create something where the kids can just show up and learn how to use this technology that's not just our future, but it's today.
Yeah.
You know, this is today right here. And so there's that. And then the mental health conference, public safety and mental health that just happened. He's in the process of doing some, I think I shared with you last time, some videos of formerly incarcerated individuals. Just basically encapsulating that experience of the neighborhood that he grew up with, from beginning, from when you're a kid to you go through hard times, you pay your, your dues to society or whatever you want to call it. And then the transition of leaving incarceration to the what we call the real world, and that whole transit. And so he's like, there's a little bit of what he does in all of that, that whole process. And the idea is to just, encourage healing, I guess, and so, and I was just lucky enough to meet him, right? I was just fortunate enough to meet this guy.
Yeah.
And I was doing kind of some investigating on, my idea at the time was like, what can I contribute to that's already doing good in the community versus trying to start something from scratch. I didn't have the time or the interest in starting something from scratch. So I was like, what can I just contribute to?
Yeah.
And luckily I met him. And then I also met Wayne, and I work with SOS. And then Jimmy, I was, not a whole lot of help, but what I could, I was willing to offer help if I could. And so there's lots of nonprofits. Yeah. There's lots, but for whatever reason, certain ones just kind of stand out to me and connect to me, I guess, or relate to me. And maybe that has something to do with my upbringing in Oceanside, the Valley, or whatever. And I actually did live in Center Street from 80 to 85 before we moved to the Valley. Wow. So it's like all of that is just connected some weird way. Yeah. It's very interesting to me. I don't necessarily understand the whole thing.
That's how, and I think those are the most beautiful things, right? Like, nobody really knows what happens inside of the cocoon with the caterpillar. Like, you can go and look it up, but you still, unless you are that type of scientist, you really don't, there's a metamorphosis happening, right? But it's like me trying to explain to people how I believe my life has changed. Some of the homies, they don't really understand it. They just and it's uncomfortable for some, but for the most part, they respect it. Or they're just like how? You know what I'm saying? You can't explain it, but it's a beautiful reality. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. It sits well with law enforcement. It sits well with certain individuals from the communities that I was at odds with. But at the same time, it makes people uncomfortable because it's unexplainable. Like how. But I think those are the things that I think have the most impact. Are the beautiful unexplained things. Like you can't really explain them. But you had mentioned how you were introduced to him ultimately was by you operating in your profession and your expertise. You know what I'm saying? You mentioned it earlier in the podcast when you introduced yourself and what you do. You know what I'm saying? How did you get into just wanting to free people financially and make, you know what I'm saying, like make financial literacy, or I had looked up real quick this definition for financial responsibility. It says living within your means regardless of the levels of those means. And like, how do you, is it like, I imagine like you coach, right? Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Ultimately, that's, probably one of the foundational things that you make yourself available for is just to be something that people can kind of like stand on while you kind of like lead them and guide them and direct them into making the best decisions with their finances. How did you come to that, like that niche and that expertise?
That came out of my own struggles. As a kid, I come from humble beginnings, and even as a young adult, it was a struggle. I graduated from Vista High. I barely graduated from Vista High. I had to take extra credit, whatever. So school was never easy for me. So I didn't fit that definition of a successful student that is automatically just going to go to college and then get a career and then be, secure financially. That wasn't me. School wasn't me. I went to Miracosta, and at the time I was learning, graphic design, from the graffiti arts and trying to turn that into something profitable that I could live off of. Yeah. Professionally speaking, I was a graphic artist before I was a financial consultant or whatever you want to call it. And so I did a little bit of that. I built a business out of that. That in 2008, when the real estate crisis hit, we ended up having to close the business. After that, I did some freelance, but it never really became what I wanted it to become. And so I started to learn about money. So as a kid growing up, to me, money has to do with that parallel of what's going on inside and what's going on outside. And so to me, I believe that person that I am inside, because we all have our existence within, that we are what we are. We can try to lie to ourselves, but what's the point of lying to ourselves? Because we know who we are, what we are, and everything we think, and at least we should try to, right? Now, I can't say that I know everything, but I'm working on it. But the level of, I don't even know how to describe, like how well I am inside is going to determine how good my life is on the outside. And that isn't always exactly like how much money's in the bank account, but it's how you live, right? And people can do well with, as that definition said, living within your means. You don't have to be a wealthy person to be happy, right? Although, however, you do need money to pay for bills, buy food, the bare necessities that we need to live, right? Food, clothing, shelter, all of that. Yeah. And so there's this relation between our mindset and our ability to like earn a living and create a lifestyle for us, right? And back to social conditioning, the world tells us basically what our income level should be based on our ethnicity, skin tone, whatever, right? You know, me being white, I know that I have had certain privileges. I know that. I don't necessarily can say that I recognize them all, because there was a time where I didn't even necessarily wasn't even thinking about it.
Yeah.
But I've come to a realization that this world does offer privileges to people of my skin tone.
Yeah.
And I can either, you know, just go with it, or I can use it to the benefit of the greater good and say, okay, maybe I can do things that some of my friends of color cannot. So let's use that, right?
Yeah.
Let's figure out a way. And so I started learning about money. Because prior to that, I always had a bad feeling about my money. So me was always, you know, the only way to become rich is to step on somebody else, or to do something that you shouldn't be doing. To, you know, somebody else has to suffer for you to become rich. And I got to a point where that wasn't necessarily the case. I started meeting people, you know, that had a little bit, at least from my perspective, were rich, right? Mm-hmm. And they were good, decent people. And so I started learning about, it's really just numbers. You know, if we succumb to this social conditioning that tells us how we're allowed to live based on these things about us, then we're only going to reach a certain level. Yet mathematics doesn't depend on that.
Yeah.
You know, money is math, you know, and so if I'm willing to accept that, even though my last name is Chavez, and, you know, for me to truly get the ultimate wealth, I should be like Smith or something, right? I mean, seriously.
No, that's just,
you know, then I'll never get there. But if I just say, okay, it's just numbers, right? Mm-hmm. If I can figure out how these things, it's because money is not really anything of value. It's a piece of paper most part, and even the piece of paper don't really mean anything.
Right.
Right now, it's just numbers on a computer for the most part. They print papers just to keep things going, and even that's like falling apart, right? Yeah. But if I can either change the game, which that's not going to happen. The powers that be are not going to allow Gordon Chavez to change the game, or I can learn to play the game.
Right.
And if I can learn to play the game, how much more good can I do for other people that are struggling at playing the game?
Yeah.
You know, if I can translate the rules and show them, if I can do presentations in Spanish, great. You know, help the Hispanic community. If I can do it, whatever I can do to help others, and I don't know it all. I'm still learning. I have a mentor of mine who used to be my financial advisor, and now he's the one that helped me get licensed and certified and all the things that I needed to do it legally and legitimately. And now I'm trying to kind of pass it forward, pay it forward. Yeah. And so everything that I learn, I try to teach. And so the reason why I'm working with the company that I'm working, my business partner, is that it's aligned with my core values also. You know, unity, inclusiveness, diversity. You know, that's what this company, it's called Energy Financial. That's what Energy Financial is all about. It's about your inner self and the outer world and how they relate. And so that's why I work with Energy Financial, because it's out to show this and teach everybody regardless of who you are. You don't have to be white male to dominate in this world. You know, you can be anybody and still make it, as long as you understand the rules of the game and you can go get that money and understand that there's ways to do it for anybody. It's harder for some people.
Yeah.
Because of those fake rules.
Right. Or just based, like, man, just what we were talking about, like social conditioning and trauma bonds, like those two things alone can keep a person from believing that they even deserve to have anything. You know what I'm saying? Or
we are what we believe we can be.
Right. Yeah. You know, and so, man, it's amazing, man. Like I'm blessed to have an opportunity to even be in community with you, in relationship with you. I thank you for coming through and just putting your perspective out there, allowing us to see just you know what I'm saying, what's going on the inside of you and what you're doing out here in the community. If you could take like 1 minute to just kind of express to the community, you know, what like if you could sum it up, what is the point of view of, like, what is the point of you? Like, why? And there is the of you. Like, there is the VIEW, but I think it's wrapped up in and YOU. So, this is the Point of You podcast, YOU, but it has that play on words, but it ultimately means what it means. Like, what is the point of you?
I think the point of me, it goes back to the unity. It goes back to, it might sound corny as hell, but just trying to make the world a better place, starting with my community, Oceanside. I mean, I grew up here, and now I'm raising my boys here, my wife and I have certain blessings that can allow me to do other things. And so I've gotten to a point where I just want to follow my heart and do the things that are really fulfilling to me. And most of that is helping others. And by just everything that I have, trying to share it, trying to pay it forward, and it's not a lot right now, but it's growing. And the more I learn, the more I can share. And if I can help more people, that's what I'm about.